A lot of exciting events coming up in Paducah in the next few days. On this edition of City Profile, we'll tell you all about it. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to City Profile. I'm Tom Butler, and on today's show, have a guest that's been here several times, but I think this may be the first time that we've talked about the topic that we have for today. City Commissioner Robert Coleman. I asked you before the show if it was still appropriate to call you City Commissioner, and you said after how many years?
31.
After 31 years, most people call you Commissioner, so I think I'm going to continue that tradition. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you for the invite, Tom.
As we are recording this program, it is August the 3rd. The topic of the program today is the Emancipation Proclamation celebration that's happening in Paducah. But as we are recording on August 3rd, some of the events are already happening. So this is not just a one-day celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation. True?
True. It begins today and will run for 6 days.
Or
actually 7. It will wind up on Monday, August 8th. Yes.
Okay. And that's the focus of the celebration is August the 8th.
Yes.
But before we talk about the events of that, I wanted you to give me a little history lesson.
Well, the history of the emancipation goes back to the Civil War. At the conclusion of the Civil War in 1865, I believe, word began to spread that the Civil War had come to an end. The North had prevailed. Slavery was ended. And back in 1865, method of communications was slow compared to modern technology. So legend has it that the information did not arrive in Paducah, Kentucky until around August. And they simply selected a day in August to commemorate and celebrate the conclusion of the Civil War, and the most important thing was freedom from those African Americans who had been in slavery for 246 years prior to the Civil War.
And that's what the Emancipation Proclamation did.
That's what it's really all about, and it's not focused just on those persons that were freed from slavery. It was a condition in America that was impacting this nation. Had it not been for the slavery in America, we never would have had the Civil War. And so it was important for the nation that some changes come about. And basically, that was the rationale for the Civil War.
So at the end of the Civil War, it ended, and yet word didn't get to certain states for a number of months.
Months, yes.
And so those states may have still been involved in the practice of slavery until they got word I guess it basically made it illegal to own slaves in America. So that is the history of this day, and I see you've brought with you some books that you
I do
important.
considerable research on this subject. It's very interesting. The Civil War impacted not only government in America. For instance, this is a recently publicized book. It's called The Civil War and a Theological Crisis, as a Theological Crisis, referring to the impact of the Civil War on the religious community across America. And so there were studies made, there was opinions, there were those in the area of religion and theology who opposed the Civil War, not the Civil War, slavery from the very beginning. And this is a book that gives the history of that and how it impacted America in terms of theology. But it also was an economic impact on this nation. You had half of the nation on an economy based on slavery, and the other part of the nation based on progress was beginning to be made in industry back at that period of time, around the 1860s. And the nation could not survive with a divided economy. And in terms of those persons who were in slavery, I always say, I've read it, I've studied it. The two most powerful words in any language is freedom and love. And slavery took those things away from those persons. So it was important to this nation. It was important to the citizens of this nation. And there's history, a whole history behind it.
One of the things that popped into my mind as you were talking about the history is how did the transition from being a slave owner society to all of a sudden that's illegal? One day, if you're an African American in America, you're owned by another person.
That's right.
The next day, you're not. How did all those things play out?
It was difficult. To use one word, it was difficult. For example, when slavery ended at the Civil War, as I stated earlier, it did not end immediately like it should have. But when it ended, Union troops were still occupying the southern states. And following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, who was an advocate of freedom, the Union forces were moved from the South. And the history of that is when the Union military was removed from the South, immediately followed, they were occupying the South. And history will tell you after any war that we have fought, we always ended up occupying the country that we were victorious over, and until certain adjustments were being made. For instance, currently we still occupy some countries where we fought World War II, during World War II. And so after Lincoln was assassinated, the Union forces were removed from the South. The South was almost allowed to do whatever it wanted to do. So it was some difficult and traumatic days and traumatic experiences for the former slaves, not just for a few years, but from 1865 on into the 20th century, when the nation began to experience some reactions from this, and we began to pass some civil rights laws and things like that.
Right.
But
because there was still much discrimination.
Bias, prejudice, discrimination. It lasted for almost 100 years following the Civil War.
So, how far have we come?
Well, when you consider the fact that you have a group of people that you kept in slavery for 246 years, it was trauma. But when we evaluate it, especially looking at the past 60 years, the nation has moved forward in the past 6 years, and that's because of technology and progress. For example, one of the greatest technological events that happened that caused this nation to make changes, not only in terms of social conduct, but other things that happened in this nation, was the invention of television, where with the invention of television, this nation was able to see from their dinner tables in the evening exactly what was occurring, not just in social life in America, but all over the world. It was instantly brought to you in your living rooms and in your homes. And there's a saying that a picture's worth 1,000 words. When people began to look at what was happening in America, they began to get upset. And when they saw it face to face, then the changes began to amplify and magnify and change more rapidly.
I think from my perspective, things have gotten better. My dad recently told me a story about my niece and my nephew, and he was telling them some of the things that went on in America as far as discrimination and black folks couldn't eat at the same place, and they couldn't ride the bus in the same.
That's
and
true.
They were surprised. They said, "We can't believe that even went on." So we still need to educate that did go on, but it's kind of good that they have no knowledge of that kind of discrimination going on.
Well, it's good and it's bad.
Good and it's bad.
It's good and bad. For example, during the Civil Rights Movement, going back, the Civil Rights Movement actually began in an amplified manner in the 1950s by some actions of a lady by the name of Rosa Parks. And that began the civil rights movement when she refused to give up her seat on a bus where the African Americans normally rode on the bus, but they were pushed to the rear of the bus. And she had been working all day. She came in, took a seat on the bus somewhere midway or near the front. And as the bus filled up, they would ask the African Americans on the bus to move to the rear. And Mrs. Parks said, "No, I'm not. I'm not going anywhere." And the history of that, it was the beginning of this modern-day civil rights movement.
And that was a very tenuous time in American history.
Time. But what happens here is it is good, and America needs to know the history of America, because when you see people grasping and wanting progress and wanting to do certain things, the first thing would come to your mind, if you, like young people today, they don't know the history, because the history is not taught in our schools as it should be, and so they don't know what has happened in this nation. And it's like you were giving me the experience of your father telling about what happened in years prior to doing discrimination. And the first thing a young person would say, "Well, I didn't know that. Did that really happen?" Sure, it happened. Sure, it happened. And justice, in terms of full citizenship, we've come a long ways, but it's still we still have some more to go.
You think we'll ever get there?
Well, I don't like to be discouraged. It's a slow process, and I'm confident as long as we keep moving forward. The ideas don't stop.
I guess sometimes I am a little bit pessimistic, and I know that people, let's just call them who they are, racist,
They are people.
teach their children their beliefs. And so it's difficult to stop that cycle of thought when they're passing it down generation to generation.
Here's a good example here. It refers to the Civil War as a theological crisis. This is dealing with the impact of Civil War on religion in America. So the question is, how do you justify the things that occurred under slavery? And also, we always want to consider our nation as a nation that believes in the Holy Bible, a nation that's guided by the Scriptures. And so it is important that we know what has happened in this nation. It is important that we know the history of this nation, because if we do not know the history, we're destined to repeat it, the mistakes of the history.
That phrase was coming to my mind as well. As we look forward to the events of the Emancipation Celebration, do you have any educational events that are scheduled so that the young people of today can still remember and still be taught what went on?
We have some, and not only do we have some educational events that focus on the young people, and they will be some quizzes, information, questions, answers, and well, like some of your quiz shows you see on television. And for correct answers, those persons participating, the young people participating, will be given a prize. And it's divided up into age groups, beginning at the age of 5 on up through teenagers, where there will be questions asked of the young people concerning the history of America. And part of the history of America, I have another book here. It says, The African American Century. This book contains the lives of several hundred African Americans who have achieved fame, who have achieved a status in making contributions to this nation. And it gives America a view of the contributions of African Americans in this nation. And they have done as much as any other citizens in contributing to the progress of this nation.
Do you think that maybe in the future someday we won't have to look at it like Black history or Hispanic history? It will just be American history.
Well, that's the best way for it, is American history. But the total history needs to be taught. And I know we want to get on some of these